Hi everyone and welcome to MoteCon 2022. As you will know by now, we are having a pre-conference and I'm delighted to be joined one of our fantastic Mote ambassadors, Cheryl Graff. Cheryl, how are you?
I'm good. I'm a little exhausted. As I was telling you, John, earlier before we started, I'm starting at a new school, new teaching position. So we had our first day of professional development, little exhausted, but I'm really excited. Our students come back August 22nd. So I'm excited to be here, but a little tired, but I've got a lot
Well,
of
we're
energy.
excited that you're here, Cheryl. And so the title of this session is Using Mote in a special education classroom. So I'm guessing that that ties into the role that you have with your new school. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes. I am a special education teacher right now in a high school in Chicago Public Schools, which is located in Chicago, Illinois, in the Midwest of the United States.
Cheryl, I cannot wait to get going. So what I'm going to do is share your slide deck to the screen, and then I will fade quietly into the background, and I'll leave you to what I'm sure will be a wonderful session. So thank you in advance. And over to you, Cheryl.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So I have a mini presentation for you all of how I use Mote in a special education classroom. This is me, as John mentioned. My name is Cheryl Graff. I'm a special education teacher in Chicago Public Schools, and you can follow me on Twitter at Miss Graff's Room. I have a lot of ed tech certifications. I'm a Mote ambassador, Kahoot ambassador, Google certified trainer, ISTE certified educator. The list goes on and on. So I'm really excited to share with you a few tips of how I use Mote as a special education teacher in my classroom. So the agenda that I have for today is I'm going to talk to you about how I use Mote with students and then how I use Mote with my colleagues, because I do collaborate with a lot of teachers throughout the day. So I'm going to first talk about how I use Mote with students. So these are a lot of different ideas, and I've kind of showcased this out with how I use Mote with Google Tools. So Google Tools, we're talking about Google Sheets, Google Docs, different types of Google tools. So on, for instance, Google Docs, I use Mote to provide audio student feedback in the comments section so that students can play that feedback over and over as many times as they want. And they can also see the transcript from Mote as well in the comments. I add in audio task directions to a Google form. We use Google Forms a lot in the classroom. I even provide, as I mentioned, voice to text transcription to Google Slides to give students feedback. One of the things that I do to not only build relationships with my students and but I also build relationships with families. I create digital positive postcards on Google Slides, and what I do is actually add in a Mote audio message. That way, when the student or their family or their guardian opens up the postcard, they can hear those positive comments and actually see the comments on the postcard. So it really makes a nice interactive digital postcard, and they really appreciate it a lot more. In addition, I have students actually goal set with Mote for their IEPs throughout the year. I do a lot of work with students on self-advocacy, and I really want the students to advocate their learning needs of accommodations that would be beneficial in their IEPs. So one of the things that I do is I've actually had students record their progress that they're making on their IEP goals and present this live. It could be virtual or it could be in person at their IEP meeting, so that they're taking ownership on their IEP and the accommodations in their IEP. So lots of great ways that I use Mote with Google tools. At my school, we also have the LMS system Google Classroom. So I did want to share how I use Mote on Google Classroom. I provide audio announcements. So this is to gen ed students and students with IEPs. As a special education teacher, as I mentioned briefly before, I co-teach with a variety of teachers. I'm in 5 different classes, usually 5 different classes a day. So I work with a lot of different teachers. And one of the things that I like to do in the classroom is I really want to be seen as not just the special ed teacher. I want to be seen as the second teacher in the classroom. So my co-teacher and I have a Google Classroom, or co-teachers and I have a Google Classroom Spaces, and I create audio announcements to remind students of upcoming assignments. And I also put in, I call them the don't forget about. So if we have a big math test the next day, I usually make an audio recording with Mote saying, don't forget to bring your calculator for the math test. If we are doing assignments on Google Classroom, I like to provide audio feedback to students, especially on writing assignments. I go into the private comment section and I create a Mote to share with students individually their writing progress and maybe some edits that they need to do in their writing. And if we're using rubrics on Google Classroom, I love those electronic rubrics. I love giving audio feedback to students about, here is why I scored you, this number on the Google Classroom rubric, and something that you can continue to work on in order to maybe get a higher score on the next rubric. And then something that I like to do with my kiddos when we have, we call it here in the United States, resource. It's like an advisory where I see the students, my special education students, and help them with study skills, test taking strategies. And I like to start off the day by posing a question of the day. So it could be like, do you like Cheetos or Doritos? Just something silly, something fun. And the students actually use Mote to record their voice. And it's a nice SEL, social emotional learning check-in. So those are lots of ideas of how I use Mote with students. And then the last thing that I really wanted to share is how I use Mote with my colleagues. So again, I kind of divided this into using Mote for collaboration purposes and then using Mote for communication purposes. So for collaboration purposes, I'm working, as I mentioned, with a lot of different general education teachers in the classroom. We have different Google Docs and Google Sheets and Google Slides and lots of Google tools that we collaborate on so that the instruction is meeting all of our students, including our students who are ELs, who have 504s, IEPs. So I like to create audio feedback on assignments or assessments, especially in Google Docs, where I can leave my co-teacher a little comment like, hey, I think we need to tweak question 2 and maybe add in this word or give a definition. So that way my co-teacher doesn't just see my written feedback, but can actually process and hear my voice and be like, oh, that's what she's thinking when she wants to change, this question. I also really love how Mote is integrated with Wakelet. If you haven't heard of Wakelet or don't know what Wakelet is, it's great. It's kind of like a 2.0 version of Pinterest where you can add in websites, PDFs, images, videos, and you can add in Motes. So a lot of my co-teachers and I, we use Wakelet to gather sources that we want to use in our lessons. And how I integrate Mote is I actually add in comments about how we can use a particular source. So one of the classes that I co-teach is biology, and there's a lot of things that you can do with biology. One of my favorite units is the DNA unit. I found a lot of different resources about how we can have students build their own virtual DNA physical DNA models or virtually. And I have added in comments and provided different resources and added in audio comments to my co-teacher saying, hey, I think this would be a really cool warm-up, or maybe we can restructure this to make this our end of the unit assessment. So those are some really great collaboration strategies that we can use Mote. Then on the other side, you'll notice on these slides are the communication piece. So I use Mote a lot to communicate things to my colleagues. The biggest thing is we have a lot of meetings as teachers. We're in a lot of different types of, meetings with administrators, with teams. And sometimes my colleagues can't make it to meetings due to other commitments. So I like to record audio notes of important things that I heard in a meeting and share them with my colleagues through Gmail, which is great. You can save the Mote and then you can share it through Gmail. And there's also a way too that I didn't put on here, but you can actually, Mote is embedded into Gmail. So you can even record that note right through Gmail. But for me, I like to use just the Mote extension and have my notes saved in the extension. I can copy and paste them later and add them to a document or to email. And then the last way that I use Mote in a communication piece is my students, as I mentioned before, they have a lot of different learning plans. Here in the US, they have what's called an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. So it basically tells any teacher that works with the student what their learning needs are, what accommodations they get, like maybe they get extra time on a test, maybe they get access to graphic organizers. So what I do, since teachers are overwhelmed a lot with paperwork, I actually make something called an Iep Snapshot, which gives a brief overview to any teacher of what my students' IEP looks like. And throughout the IEP, there might be some confusing language. So I often add Motes to the side. My IEP snapshots are often through Google Docs. So I like to add Motes on the side, just giving a clear explanation to teachers of what this accommodation means or what it might look like in the classroom setting. So that really concludes my session. I hope that you all gained a lot of tips and tricks and strategies of how to utilize Mote with students through Google Tools or on an LMS system such as Google Classroom, and how to use Mote with your colleagues to communicate and collaborate. As I mentioned before, my name is Cheryl Graff, special education teacher. You can follow me on Twitter at Ms. Graff's Room. And I'm so happy and thrilled to be here. Thank you, John. Thank you to the Mote team for having me here. It's been great. And reach out if you need anything.
Cheryl, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. There were so many interesting pieces. I actually jotted down hope it's okay. I didn't say I was going to do this. I've got a couple of questions just from the things I was excited about it all, but there were one or two that I just was hoping to be able to delve in a little bit more depth into that. You mentioned the positive postcards, which as a former educator just really fills my heart with joy to think that you are sending these postcards home. And could you explain a little bit more how you're using Mote and your voice in those postcards, please, Cheryl?
Yeah, so I actually found the positive postcards. It was like a Google Slides template that I found online from, it was really cool. So what I do with Mote is I actually have a QR code on the positive postcard, and it says scan here, and the family or the student can actually scan using a smartphone, tablet, and hear the message. So I have the message written. For example, it could say Johnny, I was so impressed with your participation this week. Keep up the great work. So it'll say it in written format. But if they want to actually hear, the excitement in my voice, families and students can scan the QR code to hear that message.
And that sounds great. And I am, as people might know from previous pop-up PDs, I'm a big fan of audio QR codes. I think that they really help also to bridge the divide between sometimes you have tools that are used within the classroom that might not quite make it home or necessarily be understood by the folk at home. But everyone, particularly after the last couple of years, everyone knows what to do when they see a QR code. And just as you say, Cheryl, I think there's something, it's great to be able to write things down, but for lots of reasons, connection, for accessibility, having someone's voice, having a teacher's voice, which you can also translate, by the way, using the QR code, just brings that extra layer of connectedness, as I say, between school and home. So thank you for that. You also mentioned one of my favorite EdTech tools, apart from Mote, which is Wakelet, and just the ability now of being able to put your voice into those collections. Is that something that you've been doing for a while, Cheryl, or is it something that you're just thinking about using for this year? And for this year, what would be the examples that you think that you might use that particular instance of voice into a collection?
Yeah, so that is actually very new to me. I've used Wakelet for a long time. I've done a variety of initiatives on Wakelet. I'm thinking this year, because I'm primarily teaching biology, but I have at least 3 different teachers that I'm going to be working with, and they might be doing different activities or just have, different ideas of how to teach the curriculum. I really want to continue that collaboration over Wakelet and allow not just to share a source, but use Mote to explain, like, oh, here's an amazing source that I found for DNA-based pairing, for example.
Yeah.
And
I think that sounds awesome, and I do know that in MoteCon, I know that Alex Isaacs and Lois Alston are doing some app smashing with Mote, and I'm pretty sure I've got the inside scoop that Wakelet may well be one of the tools that they are having a smashing good time with. And just finally, Cheryl, before we close, you mentioned the Iep Snapshot, which I was really interested by, because you were explaining how sometimes if you're not from that particular field, let's say you're showing another teacher, maybe, or even with the students themselves, maybe there are parts of the terminology that they may not understand straight away. But you were doing something quite interesting with Mote and in Google Docs, if I'm correct in what I recall there.
Yeah, so it's basically an overview. Now, I always tell my teachers, that I work with, make sure you read the whole document, but it's a nice overview for teachers because IEPs are a lot of paperwork. If you haven't seen one, it's a lot of paperwork. So I like to make just a one-pager kind of describing to teachers, and I add my voice to it utilizing Mote. Just some areas that they should focus on within the IEP to make sure the student is successful in their class. And since I didn't mention this before, but I primarily work with 9th graders, which is like first year of high school.
Yeah.
So we got some very interesting IEPs from the elementary school that sometimes just don't make sense. So it's really great that I utilize Mote to explain certain sections like, hey, this is what this means to other teachers, who are not in special education or just who may have not seen that accommodation or that specific need mentioned in the IEP. So adding my voice to it really helps be able to explain what the document provides. Yeah.
I think that sounds brilliant. Really, really does. And as I say, Cheryl, thank you so much for, particularly after your busy day, for rushing over to join us for this pre-conference session of MoteCon 2022. You can see just at the ticker at the bottom for people that are tuning in is that we have, so MoteCon itself is running this Friday and Saturday, the 19th and the 20th of August. For more information, you can head over to mote.com/MoteCon. The new website has gone live about 25 minutes ago. So very, very exciting. Lots of things going on there. We're going to be having competitions. Obviously, the speakers, as is Cheryl, are all wonderful. I'm not going to miss any of the sessions. And I'm sure that there'll be lots that you will be able to find, not only for yourself, but for every member of your school community. So all that's left for me to say is thank you ever so much again, Cheryl. I hope you get the time to relax this evening. And to everyone else, goodbye, and please enjoy the rest of your week. And I'll see you on Friday for MoteCon. Thanks, Cheryl.
Bye, everyone.